Hello and welcome to Miss Ferrel's podcast on teaching. Today I have Miss Grace Hanne with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about diversity in the classroom. So, Grace, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you, Jillian, for the opportunity to take a few minutes to discuss something that seems very critical and passionate as our world has changed quite a bit these past few years.
Mm-hmm. For sure, definitely. Lots of inclusion, and it seems to get closer with all the technology. There's more voices being able to be heard. And
Absolutely.
So I was just wondering what it was like for you growing up, like your different school experiences, that kind of thing. Would you be willing to share any of that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jillian. So growing up in Taiwan, which is a little island off of the mainland China, it was very different. I grew up in a society where it's like a New York City, essentially, but schools are very segregated, which most of them are boarding schools. So I joined an all-girls boarding school at age about 3.5, and it was selected by my family, lucky me, and it was very different because they were all female, including staff as well. And I'll be honest with you, it seems like you're in the prison because there was barbed wires around with security guards, and so it was very different dynamic. But that's kind of the society that I was used to at a young age, up till about, right before 10. So very different.
3 years old, like without your family in the school?
Mm-hmm. So we chose. Early on, they chose a boarding school, which I went home for holidays and certain weekends. But as I grow older, I didn't choose to do the boarding school so that you could go home every day. But again, you have that option.
So would you say it was very like academic based, or was it kind of like a family environment? Since it was a boarding school, you had like friends and you did like other things or was it like very school like all the time?
It was very strict. I remember most of the teachers, again, they're all female. They look like nuns, I'll be honest with you. They had their button all the way up their throat. They have everything covered. Their hairs was all the same styles. I mean, very, very disciplined. Were they nurturing and caring and open arms and fuzzy? Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Right? It was very academic. You do as you're told. You were rewarded based upon how disciplined you are. And obviously you're punished severely if you don't.
Do you think that was like a good experience overall, or like a bad experience? Like you wouldn't recommend it?
So that's a great question. So growing up there, you didn't know any different. Mm-hmm. So that was the norm if you think about it, right? They talk about prestige school having that. But now that I've been exposed to the Western culture, absolutely not. I mean, it was very degrading. It takes any creativity or any innovation out of any child because they put you in this box so that you're in full discipline. That's how they want you to be, right? You were trained to become this model that they want you to be. But like I said, we didn't know any better when we're in there. Mm-hmm. Can you say it was a survival? Yeah, at times, right? Because the punishment was pretty harsh, the way that they disciplined the kiddos. I even remember I was punished by staying in the dark room carrying 2 pails of water.
What?
Right. So, I mean, to them back in the 80s, you think, my goodness, now that's abuse, right? But back then it was the norm, right? They used different switches. You're punished if your nails were longer or you didn't, dress appropriately to their standards. So again, it was very different now that I look back on it. So
that's crazy. So you obviously did come here and you did school here. What was your experience at like high school in America? Was that
that's a
more
good question.
Positive or?
So I was about 12 when I came, so it was just about entering middle school. But the bad thing is I didn't speak a word of English, so they held me back a year to be in the elementary. So I started 5th grade again, just so that I would be in the grade school system. It was really different, I'll be honest with you, Jill. When I first came, I didn't even know where I was coming from. All I knew is I had a postcard from my uncle who was living in Michigan, and it was the Disney Mickey years. So I thought for sure, wow, I'm going to a school in this beautiful world that looks like Mickey Mouse. Not so much, obviously. Mm-hmm. But coming here, going to school, and the biggest shock, I'll be honest with you, is seeing boys in my school.
Wow.
Okay. And the fact that none of them are in uniforms. And that was the second shocker. Obviously, as I go in there and just through observation, since I can't communicate, it was just fascinating. That what is this world?
Yeah.
So I still remember that was really intrigued and really surprised. But as I learned more English, because most of my time was spending in ESL, obviously it was much more niche group. So you hang out with the same folks, right? That's kind of the same pool with the same set of teacher. It was much more nurtured. So I didn't get as much exposure as to the real classroom until about a few years later. So in middle school, then I realized, wow, teachers are super encouraging, super nice. They give hugs, which is very different. But again, there's boys and girls all mixed together. But it's just a sense of encouragement, sense of happiness that I'd never seen, if you ask me, looking back. So that's, like I said, that's what's shocking.
What I find really interesting that you kind of brought up was the connection to Disney, because like when my mom kind of came to America, she thought like it was going to be like what Disney showed on TV.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, because the media portrays through a different exposure, right? So us not knowing what we're jumping into, that's what we associate to. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you had a good experience in an ESL classroom. I'm getting my minor in ESL education. Is there anything that you did in that classroom that you would encourage other future ESL teachers to kind of do, like any like experiences or activities that you remember specifically?
I'll tell you a couple of things that really jumped in my memory because it really stood out. I have amazing ESL teachers. Again, we were always with them. Some were much more stricter than the others. Two things that jumped out was the memory that they took beyond the teacher, what the teacher's role was. So one of my ESL teacher early on took us as a field trip to her apartment, and she exposed us by making s'mores for us the first time. I've never even seen such a thing. But just the fact that she took us out of that setting and get us exposure to different things outside that, again, I still remember that today. And that was when I was 12, right?
That's so cool.
And I'm 42 right now. But that, again, that's something that was extraordinary for me. Couple other things that the other teacher did is, one of them gave me a dictionary that I still have with her note on it to me. I didn't understand what the note was about till later years, but just the fact that they care so much, and they did things that you would never imagine they would do. Again, that's what stuck to my mind. Now, some of the recommendation I give, again, that's a positive side. On the other spectrum, I had a couple teachers that was very traditional, right? He or she is very stern about this is my way of how to do things. So looking back on them, my recommendation for them is you need to be mindful of the diversity of your student, right? Because that's your customer base. They're very, very different. So you can't say that one size fit all, because it isn't, especially in a diverse group. So that's one thing I will recommend, is be understanding your population. Right.
Definitely. And like allowing them to express their culture and like bring it into the classroom as well, I think is very important. What would you say, like, as a parent, like being like a parent now and having children in the school system, like what could we do to like bring in that kind of like your own like background into the classroom for them and make them feel proud?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, looking at teachers as a business, right? These children are your population. They're your customers. You have to understand where did they come from, because that's who they are today. So the more you learn about them, the more advantage a teacher should have in understanding why they are the way they are, then perhaps there's a better game plan that can be set, whether it's individual or a smaller group, whatever that needs to look like. But again, be more customer centric, be population centric, so that it should be more of a win-win. Like I said, be looking back on some of them, they use their own way or the highway, the one size fit all. It just doesn't work, especially this day and age. And culture is fascinating because they're so different, but their influence is so impactful, especially at that young age. They define who we are. So the more we know, the better we can influence them, right? Give them exposure so that they could, like I said, get their own creativity back and innovation back as they grow up. So that, I think, is the magic that any teachers can bestow on each one of them.
Are there any projects that your children have done that you wish you had the opportunity to do? And what were those projects that they did?
Absolutely. So for one thing, we didn't have any extracurricular activity. It was all 100% I laugh at that answer. It's like 150% academic because it's never good enough, right? We go to school 6 days out of the 7th day, right? And if you're lucky, on the 7th day, you get more tutoring. So that will be one thing I wish I had from extracurricular standpoint. Secondly is all the other creativities and innovative things to teach, right? So instead of just saying, hey, memorize your multiplication table, is what I'm used to as the norm, I'm watching my kiddos that they have songs developed to help with the memory and so forth. So again, different method, but still the same result. So that would be something I was super excited to see with my kiddos that I didn't get to have.
So would you say that you like project, like the new thing in education is project-based learning, where like they pool different like things that like your student obviously like is learning to read. So part of the project is they have to read something and then like apply that to whatever they're trying to make or build. Would you like that, to see more of that as a parent, or would you prefer kind of the traditional method?
Yeah, that's a tough question, right? Because every kid learns differently. So I would say, I mean, ideally we like them to be able to absorb the basic foundation learning, but be able to apply it to their real life situation. But I'll be honest with you, looking at a certain age, I just don't think that they have certain comprehension. So we got to be mindful of that. So in the perfect world, is there a balance or a threshold where we can use a traditional method and being able to get them understand the basics or the underlying bedrock of certain pieces, but then build upon that using those project based. But again, they got to be ready for it with their age or maturities or comprehension. So I would like to think a little of both.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, but still maybe majority falls on the project base, but keep, good 25-30%.
So you obviously have like a lot of experience with like the business sector, as well as kind of nursing. I believe you have some knowledge in nursing. Since you have so much knowledge in those fields, what could I use, what could I try and encourage in my students that would make them successful in either of those fields, or like that you don't always see being taught in the classroom?
Absolutely. So funnily, I'm part of the new innovation team for Johnson County right now. So part of our learning for our population is we teach people what innovation creativity is about. So part of that was we let them know, did you know that in your lifetime we were trained to be not innovative as you grow up? So if you're age 5 and older, it's trained out of you. So how do we as adults and professional get retrained in that perspective? And that's hard, right? Because change is hard in general. But that's what we're doing today in the professional setting. So funnily, we're doing what we are teaching our kids do at early stage, because of the fact that we haven't been able to harness and keep that component. So looking back, can we do more to let our kiddos know to be creative, be innovative, not be afraid to change? Absolutely, because it seems like the society teaches or get it out of us. So that'll be one thing looking at now.
Would you say games, like playing games, kind of helps with being creative?
Or even any imaginary things, right? It was funny, we had a session where we said, how can we solve a problem? We said, well, gosh, what if we got all the 5-year-olds in kindergarten together and asked them, right? It seems a bit silly, but in a way it's not, because their mind works differently. Well, why can't you change this and this, right? So that was actually one exercise we're thinking, is bringing the kids in to see what creative things that they can teach us today.
And I think part of that is like kindergartners have a lot of self-confidence. Like they'll tell you what they're thinking. That sometimes can be not a good thing,
right? But
like that bravery to just like say what you're thinking.
The fear's not there.
Yeah.
And right now, being a grown-up professional, fear is built in so massively that we cannot be creative and innovative anymore because of that. So that's why I would say, how do we go back to the foundation to get that back?
Yeah, one of my like key elements of my pedagogy is like failure is important. Failure is growth,
Yes.
and we need to not be like scared of like
Very much
not
so.
doing well, because how can you learn if you're not like messing up?
Right. And well, it was funny, there's so many books out there. So we actually brought a motivational speaker by the name of Nick Kittle, and I can share that with you. He actually had an amazing book that talks about failures and the power of piloting, right? So you start small and you run fast, but every time you do pilots or you experiment things, even if they don't come out the same way, you learn so much even going through the motion. So again, that's why I think it's a huge piece that we should think about, letting them try things and watch what happens.
Yeah,
So.
for sure. And then kind of our final question in our last 5 minutes or so. Obviously, you're Asian American. What ways could I, as a future teacher, make the classroom a better place for Asian American, include them more? Because I feel like just at school we've talked a lot about how we can include Hispanic people and people who are African American, and I don't know if there's always like a lot of conversation about Asian Americans, and I don't know if that's because of the whole like model minority kind of racism type thing, but I feel like we really need to talk about those experiences because they're very diverse and very important and beautiful.
Absolutely. You know, America's known as the melting pot for a reason. So might as well put that front and center. So as teachers in their classroom, can you do more to get folks more exposed to what that's about? So if you have kiddos from different parts of the world, let them teach us what was their life about, just like you're doing to me right now, right? This is what my life was at age 1 through 12. It is completely night and day now. So be mindful of doing that perhaps with your population in class. Let them shine a bit and see what their culture is. So not only do they get to build their self-esteem and share their experiences, but the recipients get to learn what that world is like, even if extreme opposite, right? So I would think that platform is very important. And you know, one other thing is, you know, if I was a teacher, if I knew that I have Spanish speaking or Mandarin speaking or Portuguese speaking students, maybe I'll pick up a few words, right, to grab them or their attention and say, hey, I took the liberty, I took the time and invested time to learn where you came from, what you're about, even the language. I think that way they build that relationship with you. And they realize that, hey, education can be fun and they do care where I came from. So
yeah, we talk a lot about how like learning can only occur like in a relationship, and like building those relationships and like validating other people's experience really help build a solid and fruitful relationship. So
relationship establish trust, and you cannot have a relationship without trust. And what's powerful is once you have that with the kiddos, they will take that home to their mom and dad, and they will appreciate what our education system is doing. So
so thank you so much for speaking with me, and it was great catching up and talking about this important topic. So thank you so much.
Of course, anytime.